The first thing I remember about that day was the silence. The cemetery in San Francisco was draped in fog, the kind that rolls in from the bay and clings to everything it touches. My grandmother's casket was being lowered into the ground, the ropes groaning softly as they carried her down. Around me, relatives bowed their heads, some whispering prayers, others wiping away tears. But my parents weren't mourning. They were fighting. My father's voice broke the hush like shattered glass. He accused my mother of trying to claim what wasn't hers, saying she had no right to touch his mother's estate. She snapped back that she deserved half because she had been the only one caring for her in the final weeks. Their argument rose louder and sharper until the people around us began shifting uneasily, eyes darting anywhere but at them. Then my father turned to me. He didn't lower his voice. He didn't care that everyone was listening. He looked straight at me and said, "Daniel, you're not getting a cent. You don't deserve anything she left behind." My mother added, almost proudly, "Your grandmother may have indulged you, but she didn't raise a man worthy of carrying the Hayes name." The words stung worse than the cold wind cutting across the headstones. They had always found ways to remind me that I was a disappointment, but to hear it here at my grandmother's funeral in front of everyone, it was unbearable. I clenched my fists in my pockets, holding my tongue, because if I spoke, my voice would break. I wanted to shout that I didn't care about the money, that none of it mattered. The only thing I cared about was her. Grandma Eleanor had been the only one who made me feel like I belonged. She once told me, "Daniel, you see the world differently, and that's not a weakness, it's your strength." Now she was gone, and I stood there surrounded by family who saw me as nothing but a failure. What I didn't realize was that she had left me something after all, something far more valuable than money. When the service ended and people began to drift away, the family lawyer quietly approached me. His suit was damp with fog, his voice low so only I could hear. "Daniel, your grandmother asked me to give you this." He handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in her familiar script. My hands trembled as I tore it open. The first line I read stopped me cold. San Francisco always had a way of being beautiful and cruel at the same time. That morning was no different. The fog clung to the steep hills and blurred the outlines of the old Victorian houses, while the church bells tolled above us, their hollow sound carrying across the cemetery. Each note seemed to remind me of what I had lost. Grandma Eleanor Hayes had been the soul of our family, though my parents would never admit it. She was the one who gathered us for holidays, who never forgot a birthday, who slipped me notes of encouragement when I was falling short of their impossible expectations. Without her, everything felt unsteady, as if the house she built was already leaning without its foundation. I stood near the front, stiff in a black suit that wasn't even mine. I had borrowed it from a friend, since my parents never thought it worth spending money on me. My hands stayed buried in my pockets, my head lowered, not in prayer but to avoid their eyes. Clara and Richard Hayes, my parents, stood polished and perfect as if they were posing for portraits. My mother wore a fitted black dress with pearls gleaming at her throat, pressing a silk handkerchief to her eyes, though I had not seen her shed a real tear. My father stood beside her, tall and rigid, his expression unreadable but his voice still echoing in my mind. "You get nothing." My father stood tall beside my mother, a silver tie knotted neatly at his throat, his jaw set in that stern expression he wore whenever he wanted to remind the world he was in command. Together they looked like the picture of grief, a dignified couple mourning a matriarch, but I knew the truth. Their sorrow was not for Eleanor Hayes. Their thoughts were on the $12 million she left behind, properties, investments, decades of careful saving. For them, her passing was not only a loss, it was a chance, and each of them wanted to claim it. I thought back to how different things felt when she was still alive. My grandmother had a way of softening their sharpness. When my father tore into me at the dinner table for refusing to follow him into law, she would take my hand beneath the table and squeeze gently, as if to remind me I wasn't alone. When my mother scolded me for eating too much, Eleanor would quietly slip me another cookie with a wink. Once she told me, "Daniel, don't let them measure your worth with their yardstick. You see the world differently, and one day people will recognize that as your strength." Those words had carried me through countless nights when I felt crushed beneath my parents' disappointment. My mother never hid her disdain. She wanted a son who fit her vision of power and polish, someone ambitious and ruthless. Instead, she got me, and she reminded me often, "You waste your time with books and drawings," she would sneer. "Do you think art will feed you? Do you think your grandmother's money will carry you forever? It won't." My father was no gentler. His judgments cut deeper because he delivered them as if they were truth carved in stone. Once he looked at me with cold certainty and said, "You don't deserve the Hayes name. You're weak." I learned to keep my hurt hidden, but Eleanor always saw through the mask. She'd place a hand on my shoulder and insist that strength wasn't in volume or money, but in honesty and kindness, qualities she swore I had, even when I felt invisible. As the priest spoke about her life, I let my gaze wander over the crowd. My Uncle Paul sat stiffly, restless, his eyes darting toward the polished casket as though it were a locked chest of gold rather than a final resting place. He had always been my father's shadow, eager to follow, desperate for scraps of wealth or influence. My cousins whispered together, their suits too sharp, their eyes bright with anticipation, each of them already imagining what the will might reveal. None of them were here for her. Not really. They were here for what she left. I stood among them feeling like an outsider in my own family. I had no claim, no authority, no weight in their world of ambition. But inside, grief churned like a storm. I loved her. I missed her. And I despised how her death had become a stage for greed and calculation. When the priest lowered his voice in final prayer, I shut my eyes and tried to hold on to her laugh. It was soft, almost musical, the kind of sound that made you smile no matter how heavy your heart was. I pictured us in her kitchen on quiet afternoons, her teaching me to knead dough while sharing stories about her childhood. She had grown up with nothing, raised by a single mother who scrubbed floors to keep food on the table. Everything Eleanor built, she built with her own hands. That was the woman they should have been honoring. But all I could hear was the hiss of my parents' whispers as they argued about what they believed belonged to them. By the time the casket sank into the earth, I felt hollow, as if I were watching my family splinter into pieces I would never be able to put back together. Even in the emptiness that pressed down on me, there was the faintest spark of something else. My grandmother had never acted without thought. She was deliberate, careful, always planning beyond the moment. I didn't know yet what she had left behind, but I couldn't shake the sense that this day, heavy, suffocating, unbearable, was not the end of her presence in my life. It was the beginning of something I couldn't yet name. When the service ended, the quiet reverence shattered. Conversations sprang up in low tones, eyes darted across the room, and the air filled with the restless hum of family politics. People drifted toward the reception hall, but my parents stayed rooted near the casket. At first their words were hushed, but soon their argument cut sharply through the murmur. "You don't touch a penny of this estate," my father snapped, his voice hard, his hand slicing the air. I protected her investments. I built this family's reputation while you wasted your time. My mother squared her shoulders, her reply quick and cold. You think you carried her fortune? I was the one at her bedside. I managed her doctors, her care, her final days. I gave up my time while you buried yourself in work. If anyone has earned a claim, it's me. Their fight grew louder, echoing off the walls. Some relatives tried to look away, sipping their drinks or fiddling with their jackets, but others watched openly. My Uncle Paul leaned against a column, arms folded, a thin smirk tugging at his mouth as if he relished the spectacle. My cousins whispered behind their hands, eyes flicking back and forth between my parents as though they were front-row spectators at a fight. I felt their stares press down on me, waiting for my place in the chaos to be revealed. And then my father turned, his gaze locked on me, his face flushed, and when he spoke, his voice silenced the room. And as for you, Daniel, he said, his words slicing through the air, don't think for 1 second you're entitled to anything. You've done nothing to earn it. You've been nothing but a disappointment. The heat rose in my chest so fast it made my pulse pound in my ears. My mother didn't protest. She folded her arms, her voice cool and certain. He's right. Your grandmother may have spoiled you with her attention, but she didn't prepare you for reality. You don't contribute. You don't lead. You are not part of what this family has built. Their words carried so clearly that I saw one of Eleanor's oldest friends wince. The woman's eyes met mine with quiet pity, but she said nothing. No one did. Their silence made my parents' cruelty echo louder. Uncle Paul let out a chuckle, low and sharp. Guess you'll finally find out what it's like to work for a living, he said. No more leaning on family handouts. The humiliation burned through me hot and raw. I wanted to shout back, to remind them that I had never asked for their money, that I had never cared about wealth the way they did. All I had wanted was their approval, their acceptance, some proof that I mattered beyond the shadow of their disappointment. But I bit down hard, my teeth grinding together, because if I spoke, I knew my voice would tremble. I thought of Eleanor again, her steady hand on my shoulder, her voice telling me to keep my head high, to find strength in who I was, not in who they wanted me to be. But those words felt distant now, drowned out by the sharp edge of my parents' rejection. Their argument rolled on, circling the same poisoned words. Assets, properties, portfolios. Each claim colder and more selfish than the last. They didn't bother to lower their voices anymore. My grandmother's grave had become nothing but a backdrop for their quarrel. Shame settled over me like smoke, thick and choking. Whenever I lifted my eyes, someone was watching. Some with awkward sympathy, others with the gleam of entertainment. No one stepped in. No one told them they'd gone too far. I wanted to walk away, to leave the whole unseemly performance behind. But my legs felt nailed to the ground. Each accusation and sneer carved away at the notion of family I'd once clung to. What was left was the hard truth. I stood alone. My parents had made their verdict public. In their eyes, I was not only undeserving of what my grandmother had left, I was unfit to bear our name. When the shouting finally cooled, it wasn't because any peace had been reached. It was exhaustion, anger evaporating into hollow victory. My father's face was flushed and raw. My mother wore a thin smile that belonged on a stage. My uncle murmured something to one of my cousins, and they glided off, laughing under their breath. I remained a figure everyone could turn away from. They had stripped me of every scrap of dignity in the one place I should have been allowed quiet grief. I bowed my head and blinked until my vision cleared, feeling the burn of humiliation and the cold slide of grief. Inside me, hurt and fury collided like wind and flame. I wanted to shout. I wanted to run. Instead, I stayed because I told myself I wouldn't let them see me break. Just as I thought the day would be remembered only for their cruelty, a quiet voice at my shoulder stopped me. "Daniel," the lawyer said, gentle and low, "your grandmother left something for you." The argument still buzzed in my ears when a hand settled on my shoulder, steady, unobtrusive. I turned to see Robert Hale, the lawyer who'd managed Eleanor's affairs for years. He looked out of place among the theatrics, composed, polite, his gray hair combed back, his suit immaculate. There was a seriousness in his eyes that cut through the noise. "Daniel," he repeated so that only I could hear, "she asked me to give this to you." For a moment I thought I'd misheard. My parents had just publicly disowned me from any claim, had said I was worthless to the estate. And yet here was the man who knew the will better than anyone, telling me otherwise. My throat tightened. I nodded and followed him down a quiet corridor to a small study off the reception room. The door shut, muffling the laughter and gossip beyond. The study was dim, lit by a slant of stained glass that painted the desk in pale color. On the wooden surface rested a single envelope, softened at the corners by time, the paper browned where years had touched it. My name was written across the front in the looping, familiar hand I knew from birthday notes and scraps she'd tucked into my sketchbooks. Seeing it there made my chest ache. I reached out but paused, my fingers trembling above the paper. Robert's voice was calm behind me. "She wanted you to have this, and only you." I felt in that quiet room that something of Eleanor's care reached for me once more. "She trusted you, Daniel." Those words struck harder than any insult my parents had ever hurled at me. In a family where I had been told all my life that I was unworthy, my grandmother had set me apart. She had placed her faith in me. My chest tightened as I picked up the envelope. The paper felt thin, fragile, as though it might tear with a breath, yet its weight pressed down on me unmistakably. Doubt clawed at me. What if it was only a letter of comfort? Words meant to soften the blow of being excluded from the estate. What if it was nothing more than encouragement to stay strong? A lifetime of being overlooked had taught me not to hope too much. But still, I slid my finger under the flap and tore it open. Inside was a folded letter written in her elegant script and a small brass key tied with a faded ribbon. My breath caught. I placed them gently on the desk, then unfolded the letter with trembling hands. The very first line froze me. "Daniel, you are the only one who ever truly saw me, not my money. This is why I trust you with what no one else knows." I read it again and again. Each word cut through the cruelty of my parents, silencing the echo of their rejection. Eleanor had seen me. She had understood what this family had become, their hunger for wealth and power, and she had chosen me for something beyond all of it. I glanced up at Robert, who gave me a small nod. "Take your time," he said. I kept reading. Her words carried love but also urgency. She wrote about how she had built more than wealth. She had built a legacy, one she feared would be devoured by greed if left in the wrong hands. She spoke of truth, of values she believed someone in the family must preserve. Then she explained the key. It belonged to a safety deposit box at a bank near her old home. Inside, she wrote, was something she had never revealed to anyone, not included in the estate, not known by my parents or uncle. It was meant for me alone. Relief washed over me. I had not been forgotten. Gratitude followed because she had chosen me. But beneath it all was fear. Whatever waited in that box wasn't just a gift. It was a burden, a responsibility. The way she wrote about it made it feel less like treasure and more like a torch being passed. I set the letter down, pressing my hand against the desk to steady myself. Outside, I imagined my parents laughing with relatives already scheming how to divide the fortune. If they knew about this, they would never allow me to keep it. They would fight me for it, grind me down as they always had. Robert's voice broke into my thoughts. She believed in you, Daniel. She said you were the only one who could carry this. I closed my eyes, breathing deeply. I had a choice. I could slip the letter back into its envelope, pretend it was nothing, let my life continue as it always had, silent, overshadowed, invisible. Or I could take the key, accept her trust, and step into whatever she had set aside for me. I reached for the key. The brass was cool against my skin, heavier than it looked. As I closed my hand around it, something shifted inside me. For the first time in years, my parents' voices didn't feel stronger than mine. For the first time, I felt chosen. I tucked the letter carefully back into the envelope and slipped it inside my jacket. The key I held tightly, unwilling to let go. When I turned, Robert was watching me with quiet understanding, as though he could see the decision etched on my face. "I'll honor her trust," I whispered, my voice barely audible even to myself. "Whatever she left behind, I'll protect it." Robert gave a single steady nod. That's exactly what she wanted. Stepping out of the study, the low hum of conversation spilled over me once again. My parents stood at the center of the reception hall, their polished smiles concealing the sharpness in their eyes as they worked the room. They didn't notice me slip past them, and I was grateful. My hand stayed in my pocket, fingers gripping the brass key as though it might vanish if I let go. They thought they had stripped me of everything, but they were wrong. Eleanor had left me something they could never touch, and I was determined to uncover what it was. That night, sleep refused to come. The envelope and key sat on my nightstand, their presence heavy in the dark. My grandmother's words echoed over and over in my mind. She trusted me. She had seen me. That thought alone burned brighter than any insult my parents had thrown at me. But the weight of the key carried another question. What could be so important that she had hidden it away even from her own children? By morning I could wait no longer. I dressed quickly, slipped the letter into my jacket, and secured the key in my palm. The streets of San Francisco glistened from an early rain as I made my way to the bank named in her letter. The building was an old brick structure on a corner, its design carrying the weight of generations. Inside, the air smelled faintly of paper and polished wood. A man in a vest greeted me. My voice quivered as I asked for access to a deposit box under Eleanor Hayes's name. He studied my ID, compared it to the authorization she had left behind, then motioned for me to follow. Down a long hallway, a vault door loomed like something pulled from another century. The guard worked a series of clicks and turns until it groaned open, revealing rows of small steel compartments. He pointed toward one marked with her number. "You may use a private room," he said, handing me a tray. I slid the brass key into the lock. It turned effortlessly, as if it had been waiting for me. The box was heavier than I imagined. Carrying it into a quiet side room, I closed the door and set it carefully on the table. For a moment I just stared at it, heart hammering. Then with one deep breath I lifted the lid. Inside lay a bundle of leather-bound journals tied with a faded ribbon, a velvet pouch, and a sealed envelope with my name written in Eleanor's graceful hand. "To Daniel, when you are ready." My hands trembled as I untied the ribbon and opened the first journal. The leather was worn, the edges frayed, the pages yellowed with time. And with the very first lines I felt myself drawn into her life. She had written everything. her struggles as a young woman with nothing, the sacrifices she made to build the fortune the family now fought over, and the secrets she had carried in silence. Page after page, her voice grew clearer. She wrote about Clara and Richard, how they had manipulated her finances, pressuring her into choices that benefited them. She wrote of their betrayal, of the way they had treated her trust as an obstacle to their ambition. She revealed how Richard had siphoned funds behind her back, hiding his greed in contracts and deals she never approved. She had known all of it. She had chosen to keep quiet, not because she was blind, but because she had wanted to preserve the family's name. And now in those worn pages, she was finally speaking the truth. Her words struck me deeper than I expected. Daniel, you must know. They will consume each other chasing wealth, but you cannot become them. These journals are my legacy, not the money. Protect them, and protect yourself. As I sat alone in that small room, my grandmother's voice felt alive in the pages, steady and unwavering. For the first time I understood. She had trusted me not with riches but with the truth. And the truth was heavier than gold. With the journals came more than memory. They carried responsibility, and with it the weight of choice. I leaned back in the chair, stunned. All my life I had been told I was small, unworthy, a failure in the eyes of Clara and Richard Hayes. Yet here in my hands was proof that Eleanor had seen through every mask they wore. She had entrusted me with her truth, and in doing so she had given me something greater than wealth. She had given me power. My fingers moved to the velvet pouch inside the box. Untying the cord, I let the contents spill across the table. A soft cascade of jewelry caught the dim light, each piece rare, deliberate, carrying history. A diamond brooch that must have been a century old. A string of pearls, their luster still intact. A gold pocket watch etched with her initials, unmistakably hers. Beneath them rested a folded certificate, its edges stiff with age. My pulse quickened as I unfolded it. It was a deed naming me sole owner of a cottage along the northern coast. A property no one in my family had ever mentioned, set apart from the estate they worshipped. She had hidden this place away, and now it belonged to me. At last I picked up the sealed envelope marked in her familiar hand. To Daniel, my name written clearly, boldly. With a steady breath I broke the seal. Her words met me like a quiet embrace. Daniel, I have left you what I could not place in anyone else's care. The journals hold truths I never dared to speak aloud. The jewelry and the property are yours, symbols of my faith in you. Do not waste them. Build a life that reflects who you are, not who others try to make you. Remember, wealth is empty without integrity. Promise me you will carry forward what I cherished most: honesty, kindness, and courage. Tears blurred my vision before I reached the end. She had not simply left me valuables. She had given me her heart, her trust, her belief that I could be more than the shadow my parents had forced me into. For the first time I felt seen. I sat there in silence, the stack of journals in front of me, their pages whispering of secrets and sacrifice. The jewelry shimmered faintly under the lamp. The deed to the cottage lay beside them, not just paper but freedom. For the first time in my life, independence was no longer a dream. It was real, sitting within my reach. I knew if Clara or Richard discovered any of this, they would claw for it, twist it, try to take it from me as they always had. But I also knew something else. I was not powerless anymore. Eleanor had given me more than an inheritance. She had left me a choice. I could remain silent, guarding her secrets in shadows, or I could use her words to stand against the family that had tried to erase me. As I gathered the contents back into the box, one truth settled in my chest. My grandmother's legacy wasn't money, wasn't property. It was a call to act. She had trusted me, and I would not betray that trust. I left the bank with the box heavy in my arms, but my steps lighter than they had ever been. My parents believed they had cut me from the Hayes name. They had no idea that the true inheritance, the one that mattered, now rested with me. The city outside looked unchanged, fog trailing between towers, cable cars groaning along their rails, but something in me was different. I carried more than disappointment now. I carried proof that I mattered, that Eleanor Hayes had seen my worth. With the journals tucked into my bag and her final letter pressed close to my chest, I stepped back into the crowd. Strangers brushed past, busy with their own lives, unaware of the storm I had just endured. To them I was nobody. But to myself I was someone new. No longer the forgotten son. No longer the boy dismissed as weak. I was the keeper of my grandmother's truth. And I would honor it. That night I sat in my apartment with the first of Eleanor's journals open across my lap. Her handwriting moved across the pages with the same quiet grace she carried in life. Line after line drew me closer to her world, her struggles, her victories, and the choices that shaped her into the woman I had admired. I read until my eyes burned with fatigue, yet I couldn't bring myself to stop. Each word felt like a lantern in the dark, a reminder that she had lived with resilience, dignity, and an unshakable moral compass. She wanted me to do the same. The jewelry and the deed to the cottage stayed tucked safely in their place, but they were not what held me awake. It was her voice, her final lesson echoing inside me. Wealth means nothing without integrity. Carry forward honesty, kindness, and courage. Days passed, and Clara and Richard never once reached out. To them I had walked away from the funeral, broken, humiliated, erased. They assumed I had been silenced. That assumption gave me something I had never had before: freedom. For the first time, I was not chasing after their approval or waiting for a scrap of recognition. I was standing alone, guided only by Eleanor's faith in me and the truth she had entrusted to my care. A week later, I made the trip to the coastal cottage. It sat perched above the ocean, the wind sweeping salt through the air as the waves shattered against the rocks below. The shutters were white but weathered, the garden tangled and wild. Inside, sunlight poured across worn wooden floors and photographs lined the walls. Moments of her life frozen in time, untouched by the greed and bitterness that had poisoned our family. Standing in the kitchen, I could almost hear her laugh again, light and warm. I realized then this was not just a property. It was sanctuary, a place where I could begin again. It became clear to me that Clara and Richard's cruelty had never really been about me. It was about them, their emptiness, their hunger for control, their fear of irrelevance. I had carried the weight of their rejection for years, believing I was broken because of it. But the truth was different. I had been free all along. They were the ones shackled to greed. Eleanor chose me precisely because I could see past it. When it came to her journals, I wrestled with what to do. A part of me wanted to reveal everything she had written, to strip away the facade my parents and uncle had built. But another part of me understood that exposing their corruption was not what she had wanted most. Her legacy was not about revenge. It was about the values she lived by: truth, compassion, and courage. In the end, I knew the answer. My strength would not come from tearing them down, but from building a life true to the lessons she had left me. I let go of the need to fight for what they clung to so desperately. Their fortune, their influence, it meant nothing. What I had been given was infinitely more valuable: trust, purpose, and freedom. Looking back now, I see her funeral not as an ending, but as the beginning of the life Eleanor wanted for me. A life where I was no longer invisible, no longer defined by rejection, but instead by the strength she had always known was in me. If there is one truth I carry forward, it is this: family can wound you, parents can fail you, but sometimes the love and belief of one person is enough to change everything. Eleanor Hayes gave me that gift. She showed me that worth is not measured by wealth or approval, but by the courage to be true to who we are. That is her legacy, and it is the one I will protect for the rest of my life. If this story spoke to you, if it stirred something inside, I'd ask one thing: pass it on. Share it with someone who might need a reminder that strength can be found even in the darkest moments. Leave a comment if you've faced loss in your own family, or if you've ever discovered resilience in a place you didn't expect. And if you'd like to follow along for more stories like Daniel Hayes and the legacy his grandmother Eleanor left him, subscribe to the channel. Every bit of support helps keep these voices alive, and it means more than I can ever fully put into words.